You are listening to the IFH Podcast Network. For more amazing filmmaking and screenwriting podcasts, just go to ifhpodcastnetwork.com.
Welcome to the Bulletproof Screenwriting Podcast, episode number 108. Be courageous and try to write in a way that scares you just a little bit. Holly Girth.
Broadcasting from a dark, windowless room in Hollywood when we really should be working on that next draft. It's the Bulletproof Screenwriting Podcast, showing you the craft and business of screenwriting while teaching you how to make your screenplay bulletproof. And here's your host, Alex Ferrari.
Welcome to another episode of the Bulletproof Screenwriting Podcast. I am your humble host, Alex Ferrari. Now, today's show is sponsored by Bulletproof Script Coverage. Now, unlike other script coverage services, Bulletproof Script Coverage actually focuses on the kind of project you are and the goals of the project you are. So we actually break it down by three categories: micro budget, indie film market, and studio film. There's no reason to get coverage from a reader that's used to reading tentpole movies when your movie is going to be done for $100,000. And we wanted to focus on that at Bulletproof Script Coverage. Our readers have worked with Marvel Studios, CAA, WME, NBC, HBO, Disney, Scott Free, Warner Brothers, The Blacklist, and many, many more. So if you need your screenplay or TV script covered by professional readers, head on over to covermyscreenplay.com. And today's show is also sponsored by the Hart Chart Screenwriting Masterclass taught by legendary screenwriter James V. Hart, the writer of Bram Stoker's Dracula, Hook, and Contact, to name a few. His unique story mapping system will teach you how to get your script ready for production and the marketplace. To gain instant access, head over to bulletproofscreenwriting.tv/Hart Chart. That's HART chart. Now, guys, today on the show, we have author Pamela Jaye Smith. And she is the writer of the book Power of the Dark Side, Creating Great Villains, Dangerous Situations, and Dramatic Conflict. And we dive into the dark side of characters, specifically villains, anti-heroes, and how you can better craft a good bad guy for your story. So without any further ado, please enjoy my conversation with Pamela Jaye Smith. I'd like to welcome to the show Pamela Jaye Smith. How you doing, Pamela?
Oh, very well. Thank you. I'm pleased to be invited, and I'm very much looking forward to our conversation.
Yes, me as well. I'm a fan of the work you do, and I reached out to you because I wanted to talk about your remarkable book, Power of the Dark Side, Creating Villains and Drama, and I forgot the rest of the title, but Power of the Dark Side caught my eye, as everyone knows that I have a giant Yoda sitting behind me in my office. It is not a movie. This, by the way, everyone listening, it's not going to be a Star Wars only show. I promise you. But the concept of the dark side, which George Lucas so eloquently put back in 1977, is something that is in the zeitgeist without question. So I wanted to kind of delve into great villains and the dark side of story and things like that. But before we get started, how did you get into the business?
Well, as a tall girl in Texas, I started out as a model because that's what you do if you're tall in Texas.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'd been doing modeling and some TV commercials and tried a little bit of acting, but it soon became painfully obvious I was not talented. I was minus talented when it came to acting. And a friend advised me, get behind the camera as fast as you can. And why don't you go to film school? And at the time at UT Austin, I was studying English and Latin. And then I got into the film program, started studying film, and just loved it and had a great time and learned so much.
So then how did you get into the whole, story side of the business?
Well, I'd always been a writer. Actually, my first writing commission was in the 4th grade. And this girl, a few years older than me, asked me to write a little love story for a big roller skating party we were all going to. And it wasn't so much that she said, I'll pay you, as well. She said, I won't beat you up if you write this story.
It's payment. That's payment.
Yeah. But I'll write it anyway. But I've always been interested in stories. My parents read to us, and we were reading at a very young age. And I started writing and just always enjoyed it and made my way through school in music and English with a focus on both of those. So it was just a natural progression.
So in your book, Power to Dark Side, you really dive into what is a great villain. What makes a great villain?
To me, it's a person that we can both have curiosity about and anathema towards. And so it's one thing to be seduced by somebody who's a little rakish and doing a little, gee, it's kind of halfway criminal maybe. What do you think? That's not necessarily villainous. To me, the villain is the person who poses actual real danger of some kind. Mm-hmm. And that can be mortal danger like the, planet-killing Darth Vader and the Death Star. Mm-hmm. Or it can be that kind of danger that seduces you into doing things that you may know are not right, but you just kind of can't help yourself because you're being drawn into it. And then it turns you. But I don't think we need to have a total identification with a villain. In fact, I think less is probably more in that instance, because otherwise you're only speaking to the serial killers.
Right. So I'm always fascinated by villains. I mean, Hannibal Lecter is an amazing villain that you forget that he's a cannibal. He's a murderous cannibal. Yeah. And yet he is so charming and so disarming that you will have a Chianti and some fava beans with him. And you won't even, you'd be like, oh, are you eating my hand? Oh, it's fine, Hannibal. It's really remarkable. He was so not only well written, but so well performed by Anthony Hopkins. That's a villain that pops into your head. That's like that seductive villain that truly makes you forget. And he's not hiding who he is. It's not like, oh, you discover he's a cannibalistic murderer. No, it's right up front. The first time you hear his name, it's associated with murder and cannibalism. And yet you're rooting for him in that movie, in the first movie.
That's brilliant writing. And it's, I think it's something to strive for, that push-pull of the lure of the dark side, and still to hold that reticence, or to have the reticence come back in and you've gone too many steps down that wrong path. But it's a very interesting scale, I would say also. Like just about anything in story or just about anything in life, there's a spectrum. And so you've got the light dark side, the light side of the dark, where you've got the comedic villains.
Right.
And then you've got those more, the Hannibal and the Darth Vader. All those people too out of history that you think captured so many imaginations and got so many people to follow them. What was it? What was that lure? So I've always found that really fascinating. And that's part of what stirred my impetus to write the book, was to say, how do these things happen, and why, and what do we do about it?
Yeah, so how does a villain, who, again, a villain is all perspective in history. Let's talk about history, not cinema, for a second. But in history, okay, it's about perspective. So Napoleon, depending on what side of the fence you're on, he's either a hero or a villain. Unfortunately, someone like Hitler, depending on what side of the fence you are on, it's all about perspective. How does someone seduce a nation? It's like seducing one or two characters, seducing a group, but to seduce a nation, even these cults that you saw, I forgot the names, but Jim Jones is the one that rings truest right now off the top of my head, who he seduced, I don't know, hundreds of people to fly down to South America and then essentially drink Kool-Aid. Spoiler alert, drink poison Kool-Aid and commit suicide. So that's that kind of villain. But then to have the kind of villain that can literally changed the minds of the majority of a nation to do just crazy, insane, destructive, disgusting things. What is it about, that if we could study someone like Napoleon or Hitler or Mussolini, or, all these insane, villains in history, what could we take from those stories and maybe apply them to a story that we're writing with a really bad guy?
Okay. I think we have to back up a few steps.
A couple.
Talk about, so in evolutionary psychology, what we see is that, and you find this in Maslow's pyramid of needs, you find it in the chakra system, the very lowest point for any living creature is survival. That's your prime directive, is to survive. So if someone gets you into a fearsome situation and then offers you salvation from it, then you are more likely to follow them. Be it a religion that makes you afraid of this particular sin or that particular horrible, the Manichaean, the dark, the light side. I came across an interesting thing in a book about philosophy and humor, and they said you can tell a lot about a religion by what is the worst thing you can do in it. And for Catholics, it's missing Mass. For Baptists, it's dancing. And for Episcopalians, it's using your salad fork on the dessert.
Yeah. Yeah.
So tapping into the fear of a nation, tapping into people's concerns for their own livelihood is, and particularly if they've been defeated or they're marginalized, and then they are fearful, and you come along and you say, it's not your fault, it's their fault.
And there you go. And we're off and running, as they say. And you can kind of see that, and you can kind of see that as a pattern throughout history. All of those dictators that we kind of talked about did that to rise to power. Once they got to power is a different conversation. They all did different things to maintain power or lose power or so on. But to rise to that power, I mean, Hitler specifically did exactly that.
Yes.
He villainized a group of people and said, "Do you guys, I feel everybody's pain. You guys, it's not your fault. It's their fault. And I'm going to bring us back to our glory." And that was it.
Yeah. And you see that also in a couple of recent historical events in the Khmer Rouge with Pol Pot, and then in the Cultural Revolution in China with Mao, where you also had not only this fear, people were in many cases starving, they were poverty stricken, but also there was a comparison. Oh, these people are better off than you. Why? And so then you start finding that disparity between the value systems and the worth of in a system. The thinkers, the creatives, and those who aren't. And often those who aren't, they really are. They just haven't been given the opportunity to do so. So that's when you start finding, first we go in and we kill all the thinkers. We kill all the artists. We burn all the books. And you can get a lot of people who don't have access to those things to go after the elites. It's a very, very old system of social manipulation.
So one of the oldest, I don't think he's the oldest, but one of the oldest original bad boys, if you will, is the devil. He is the original villain, one of the original villains, I think. I think the Epic and Gilgamesh might have had another villain, and there might have been a couple other ones prior to the devil. But the devil's got a great PR firm. I mean, wow. We all know about the devil. What makes, and especially in cinema and in story in general, but in cinema, the devil is so seductive and attractive. What makes that kind of villain so attractive to people?
Okay, I think a couple of things. One is the power that they hold.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you are aligned with the devil, then you share in that power and you will get those goodies. And a lot of humans are more focused on, well, as that line from Postcards from the Edge where Carrie Fisher says, instant gratification takes too long. So, most of us want what we want it now, and it's okay if there's a big balloon payment at the end, because who knows, there may not be an end. This could go on forever.
Oh, yes. The stock markets are infamous for that. Infamous for that. Isn't it? You heard that story about GameStop that just came out the other day? If everyone listening, a bunch of Reddit investors are basically hijacking the Wall Street, the stock market. It is fascinating to watch, and it actually does show what the realities of the stock market is. It's essentially a game in many, many, many ways, all about perspective and talk about villains.
Yeah.
I mean, Wall Street's got I just watched a documentary on Ivan Boesky, and I was just like, oh my God, Michael Milken from the 80s and what these guys did. I mean, it's fascinating. So I love the idea of the power aspect of villains, because villains generally, not always, have a power. And it could be a grand power, or it could be Buffalo Bill in Silence of the Lambs, which is just power over his victim. I mean, there is a sense of power. There's never, and correct me if I'm wrong, are there villains who, they can't be weaker. They have to be more powerful than whoever they're going against, or at least a perceived power. Is that fair?
I think that's absolutely fair. What it seems to me is, indeed, the villain can appear weak, but turn back, it's a trap. Oh, it's like you're limping along and come help me, and okay, now that you're here.
Right? Exactly. So there's always, the villain, so everyone listening, the villain always has to be at least a bit more powerful than whoever they're going up against. And if there isn't, then if your hero is obviously stronger than the villain, then it's a weak story, because then what's the point? I mean, if I could just beat you up, it's like if I'm the good guy and the bad guy is a 7-year-old girl with a spoon who's really bad and has done bad stuff. Obviously I'm going to be able to, that's why like films like Chucky always used to bother me. I'm like, it's a doll.
It's a blanket over it.
Just kick it. It's like 3 feet tall and it's a doll. It has no magical powers. Just kick it, but then, and that's why it's like so difficult to write for characters who are gods, like Superman, like, Zeus, and even going back to the gods. It was difficult to write stories around something that's like Superman's a perfect example. It's almost impossible to write really good Superman stories because he's Superman. So you need to have someone bigger than Superman, which is hard, or at least equal to, and it's difficult to do. That's why it's just so hard sometimes to write for those kinds of heroes. Do you agree?
Absolutely, and that's why you need kryptonite.
You need something to weaken them.
You need something to weaken them if they are a strong person, and whether it is their emotional attachment to something, whether it's being physically debilitated by the kryptonite, whatever that is. Absolutely. And that balance, not equity, but that balance that keeps shifting between the villain and the hero, the protagonist and the antagonist. You don't want even, but you want it real close so that you can get the ups and the downs that make a story interesting. There's 2 villains that I have in my head that I found to be really complex because they have a point of view. And I've always found that villains with points of views make the best villains. So someone like Thanos from the Marvel universe,
who was so strong, so powerful. It literally took every superhero to defeat him. They literally, like all of them to defeat this guy. That's how powerful he was. His point of view wasn't wrong. In the sense of, the universe is overcrowded. There's not enough resources to go around. Something has to change. Now that right there is a conversation starter. Where the conversation ends is I'm going to now destroy half the population in the universe with a flick of my finger or a snap of my finger. That's where he turned bad. So it was just his perspective was, you can agree with him. Like, yeah, dude, there's a problem, but I don't agree with the way you're doing it. And that makes that villain so good. And Black Panther was another villain, Killmonger. He was like, my life was stolen from me. You got it, and you completely identify and are empathetic to him. Now, how he's trying to take power and doing it the way is wrong, but yet you feel for him, as opposed to the early days of silent cinema, where you had the guy twisting the mustache on the railroad. And that was as one dimensional as you got as far as a villain's concerned.
Yes. Much more fascinating when there is this may not be the right combination of words, but a misguided altruism.
Yeah. That's actually good. Yeah.
Well, yeah. The world would be better if, and then what you pointed out, but your methodology, dude, you got to work on that.
That's not, yeah, I get you. Maybe we could put some programs in place, but the snapping of the finger and killing everybody, half of everybody, it's a bit extreme, sir. I get it. I get it. Yeah. And it's, but I always found that so fascinating, because that character arguably was in one of the biggest movies of all time. And they built that villain up over the course of a decade, just building him up slowly and slowly and slowly. And it crescendoed in the end game, which is why people watch that end sequence in that movie. And just, I was in the theater back when you could go to theaters. You heard just the emotional release of what they had been doing. And also, on the opposite side of that, did you ever watch The Walking Dead?
Maybe one episode.
In the show, in the show, the main antagonist of the show, and there were some antagonists that show up like bad guys, official villains. But for a little while, the main villain was zombies were kind of just like the threat, and survival was essentially what they were fighting. They were just fighting the threat, and there was no main bad guy. Then a few seasons in, they got, the governor, who's a really great complex bad guy. But then they brought in this character named Negan, and Negan was so overpowering that it ruined the show for me, because I stopped watching after watching 6 years, because the villain did not give the heroes a win ever. Even if you're fighting a villain that's so powerful, you got to be able to get a punch in. For like 10 episodes, they were just beating and beaten and beaten and never gave them a moment's breath. And it was so disheartening for you to watch your heroes get beaten like that. I think the writing suffered so bad, and the show started to completely go down. It wasn't just me. Everyone got tired of it, and now it's gone. I think it's gone, or it's about to go away completely, because they just ruined it with that. It jumped the shark, as they say. But it was the villain that caused it. That villain was so overpowering, and they never gave him a win until like towards the end of the season. But by that time, you were so exhausted. You're just like, I'm over. I'm done.
Yeah. You're pointing out a good example of, once again, that balance that needs to be there. And when the imbalance is too overwhelming, you get what you just were talking about. If the people haven't seen it, there's a charmingly funny, Well, cartoon video, it's like Godzilla versus Bambi.
It's great. It's such
Right? What lasts like 10 seconds maybe, but it's just the point.
I think I saw it in the theater. I saw that in the theater when it came out. I think it was like in the 70s or 80s when that came out. But
So,
for everyone listening, this is basically the movie. This is basically the short film. It's Bambi versus Godzilla, and you see Bambi just sitting there eating, just like la 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 la, and then all of a sudden Godzilla's foot comes and stomps it. The end. That's it. Brilliant. But your point in that story.
well, yeah, once again, if it's too imbalanced, it doesn't work. Just like a Super Bowl game. You're not going to put the Chiefs against the Hart, Texas varsity football team, right? No, you have to have somewhat evenly matched, or you don't put the heavyweight against the flyweight. And think even, let's talk about waging bets.
Mm-hmm.
If there's not some kind of odds to be had,
it's boring. It's boring.
It's boring. And
on both sides. So if you have the hero that constantly is beating on the villain, I'm like, why am I watching this? This is just abusive. And if the villain's constantly beating on the hero and there's no opportunity for a comeback, like for something to happen, then it doesn't work. So that's why Rocky works so well as not only a movie, but as a series, with a couple of exceptions in that series, is where just a couple, but it was essentially what you were saying. The Chiefs versus the varsity football team from your high school was Rocky going against Apollo. He was the heavyweight champion of, well, this guy was a knee breaker, a bum. But those odds that's why that will resonate forever, because it was just the ultimate comeback story. And if we go back to Star Wars, the rebels against the Death Star.
yes,
I mean, it's one little dude in a hall, flying through a cavern, and shoots one little missile into one little hole and explodes the whole thing. Like, it's so overwhelming. And by the way, horrible design of the Death Star, whoever designed the Death Star, to have that kind of vulnerability. Let's not even talk about that. I mean, oops. I mean, come on, guys. You could have just put a flap on it. It's not that difficult. I mean, seriously. I mean, come on. But again, that kind of that odd. So you can't have a villain that is seemingly overpowered, but you've got to give the hero a shot. Me walking in with Mike Tyson, even at my age and his age, I'm not going to win that fight. There's just, it's not going to happen. There's no way I'll ever be able to. I don't even think I'd touch him. I think he'd hit me 30 times before I even blinked, even at this age where he is right now. So there has to be, like you said, that balance with villains. And I think I don't know, I can't think of any bad examples of it, but in cinema, when you watch a bad movie with a bad villain, it's because of the imbalancing of it, or that the villain is just so, there's no depth to it, or it's so one dimensional. It becomes the mustache twirling kind of villain, and there's just nothing there. And that's, but when you have a great, like Hans Gruber in Die Hard, mean, wonderful villain, just so wonderfully written, wonderfully played. And then against the hero, which is Bruce Willis, John McClane, the power struggle is really interesting in that movie, because John McClane is pretty much on the ropes the entire movie.
Oh, yeah. And barefoot for a lot of it, too.
Which was such a brilliant choice, by the way. Such a brilliant choice to make him barefoot. So he's running over glass and he's so brilliant. They didn't give him boots. I mean, that was like, it was barefoot. So it's like another level. It was so brilliantly done. But John is pretty much on the ropes the entire movie. And Hans is not particularly a imposing physical villain, but he's a villain whose intellectual and his resources are very substantial, which is his team, essentially, correct?
Yes, absolutely. And of course, Alan Rickman has that ability to just give the stare that withers.
So good.
You could just raise his eyebrow and you just go, oh, okay, fine.
Now, so you talk about the 3 levels of the dark side. What are the 3 levels?
We'll be right back after a word from our sponsor. And now back to the show.
This was so interesting when it was pointed out to me. I was taking a series of courses at the Philosophical Research Society here in Los Angeles and studying comparative mysticism. My specialty is mythology. And the physics of metaphysics and esoteric anatomy and all kinds of stuff, calling from different spiritual systems from ancient Hindu, ancient Egyptian, etc. And the teacher pointed out that there were 3 levels of the dark side. And the first level is personal. That's your own internal shadow, as Jung would say. So it's your phobias, it's your fears, it's your inabilities or your disabilities. It's one of my favorite examples of that and how the story arcs around this personal dark side is with Indiana Jones. And in the first part of the first film, we find out he's terrified of snakes. I hate snakes. And then towards the culmination of that film, he has had to rise above that personal phobia and jump down into the well of souls. Snakes. Why did it have to be snakes? Right? Or you give somebody, a fear of heights and then they have to climb the oil drill tower to save the day. The personal side is called in those old mystery traditions the dweller on the threshold, because it's what stands between you and your next step, between you and where you want to be, who you want to become, what's holding you back. And we can all probably come up with, there's procrastination or rebelliousness or laziness or I'd really just rather party than work.
Exactly.
No. And so the dweller on the threshold is what your character needs to be dealing with in addition to the exterior things. So that's your first level, is the dweller on the threshold, the personal foibles. The second level is impersonal, and that's the dark forces. That's nature red in tooth and claw. That's hurricanes. That's floods. That's earthquakes. I just watched Armageddon. What a fun action film.
It's so much fun. It's ridiculous. It's an absolute ridiculous premise. And I have to take a side note. I was listening to the audio commentary years ago where Ben Affleck asked Michael Bay in the commentaries, like, or he goes, Michael, let me ask you a question. Wouldn't it be easier to teach astronauts how to be drillers as opposed to be drillers to be astronauts? And he said, shut the F up, Ben, and just keep acting.
Oh, that's good.
But for everyone listening who's a Criterion Collections fan, Armageddon is in the Criterion Collection. So there's something to be said about that.
Yeah. And that is an example of your characters going up against level 2, the dark forces.
Mm-hmm.
You can't reason with an asteroid.
Right.
You can't bring it over to your side. What are you going to do with an earthquake?
Or the bear and revenant. Like there's no talking to the bear.
No, there's no. So it's that old saying that in nature there's neither right nor wrong. There are just consequences.
Yeah.
Now, and we're seeing a lot of in our climate catastrophes around the globe these days, we are seeing some of the dark forces, but we're also seeing the contribution of our actions, the consequences of the contribution of our actions to that. So, yeah. So dealing with the dark forces. And if you have a story like Armageddon, let's say, where the main thing is the dark force, it's the asteroid.
Mm-hmm.
Destroying the cities, going to destroy the whole planet. And then within that, you have the personal story, the father-daughter story, the love story, the friendship and collaboration, and NASA versus the government, etc. But it's against that big dark force second level. And even with a story that's all about something personal, if you put something bigger behind it, it can have more impact. So even if somebody's dealing with I think, yes, it was well received, but, was a Silver something playbook?
The Silver Lining Playbook.
Silver Linings Playbook, yeah. I would like to have seen there be just a bit more going on in the background of, some ruling that was coming down or something that was going to take away the funding from the kind of treatment that people were getting, something a little bigger. So we have, once again, a bit of balance. The third level of the dark side is what used to be called the Dark Brotherhood. Now, we're trying to be gender neutral. So we're calling it the Dark Otherhood.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And that's your Darth Vaders. It's your governments.
Mm-hmm. It's
your marauding armies. Oh, and certainly in the dark forces, you put pandemics and disease. Yeah.
Of course.
Yeah. You can't reason with the bug.
Mm-hmm.
But the Dark Otherhood can also be a very powerful villain, like a Lucifer, like a Thanos,
mm-hmm.
but something that's a little bit bigger than an ordinary person.
Right. So, I understand what you're saying. So it's not like Hannibal Lecter is a human being still, but in the grand scope of Thanos it's also a different kind of story. Thanos wouldn't work in Silence of the Lambs, though that would be an interesting film.
Try that mashup. Oh my goodness.
That would be an interesting, but you're right. These are larger different kinds of stories, especially in science fiction. You get a lot of that. And especially like in Star Wars or in sci-fi and things like that. These are these villains that are so much more than just a villain.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And Spartacus is that kind of story too.
Yep.
So those kinds of combinations, then you want to have at least, you always, I think, want to have an individual protagonist.
Mm-hmm.
So then you've got their dwellers on the threshold, their foibles, and then are you putting them up against a Dark Otherhood character or group and or against a dark force? And then you got a story. But I think we always have that dweller part too.
Now, have you had the pleasure of watching the biggest show on Netflix right now, Cobra Kai?
I love it.
It's amazing. It's amazing. Now, I was watching it when it was still on YouTube, and because I was a fan of the Karate Kid, I was like, oh, let's take a watch on it. And everything on paper, it doesn't seem like it's going to be that great of a idea. Like, okay, we're going to see Johnny Lawrence and his life is over, and the Karate Kid has a car dealership. Mr. Miyagi's not even there. It doesn't seem like it's going to work. Mm-hmm. But what the writers and the creators of the show did so absolutely brilliantly, and they're continuing to do it even through the third season, is that they keep shifting the goalposts, which is something I rarely see. Like there's anti-heroes, and we'll talk about what an anti-hero is in a minute, but literally, like at the beginning, you're like, well, Joey Lawrence is the bad guy, and Ralph Macchio, the Karate Kid, is Danny LaRusso is the good guy, because that's the way it was in the movie. But then as the season goes on, Danny LaRusso turns to he's kind of the bad guy. And Joey Lawrence,
dark side.
Right. And he's going to the dark side. And then also with their students is the same thing. They start off, and they flip as well. And they keep doing this. And then throughout the series, it's up and down. So one moment Joey Lawrence is the bad guy, then he's the good guy, then he's the bad guy, then he's both. And then same thing happens with Lewis. So now like at the end of season 3, we just know that I'm not going to spoil it for anyone listening, but they're just like, they are what they are. It's like, it's not a clear line. It's so blurred. It takes, I mean, and please correct me wrong, it takes an insane amount of skill as a storyteller and as a writer to do what they've done in karate, in Cobra Kai, because it is arguably one of the cheaper shows to shoot. It's not Stranger Things. It's not, Games of Thrones, but yet it's got numbers that are insanely bigger than those shows on Netflix. And it's all because of the story, but specifically that back and forth that is so rare to see. Do you agree?
Absolutely. And I think you put it very well. It's that shifting of the balance when each of those main characters begins to transform against and because of the influence of the other. And so there's this continual awakening, and then, oh my gosh, I didn't think I was like that anymore, but I fell into it. And then you've got that. Also, I like that generational split where you've got the young kids and you see how, talk about the dark leadership again. You see how the kids, particularly those who were bullied, who were fearful, and then you give them a tool to strike out at and strike back against those who had been oppressing them. It's classical sociopolitics psychology.
Yeah, wasn't there I think it was in Berkeley that very famous experiment, the prison experiment, where they put just 2 groups of people. One of them got guards outfits and one of them were prisoners, and it was just an experiment, and it went haywire. Like they had to stop it because the guards starting to because they felt the power. It was so, is that right? Do you know more about that experiment?
Yes, actually, I attended a lecture by Dr. Zimbardo at one point, and you can find a lot about his work on the web. It's the Zimbardo Experiment, and there were a few others that followed that, but he's got a couple of books out, and one of the most recent, in the last 15 years, was he came out with one after the torture scandal from the war.
Yeah. And
had a really good book and was giving talks about that, how easily we are seduced into the dark side by power.
Yes.
And think about this too, though. You wouldn't be seduced by power if you already had it. So when you have a system that's got a stratified populace, you've got a built-in revolution waiting to happen.
Because there's always people who don't have that power, don't have the resources to fight back. And in many ways, especially here in the United States, and I'm sure around the world as well, that we're getting beaten down by so many different powers, whether it's government, whether it's medical bills, whether it's, food that's not healthy for you, whether it's, if the credit card companies, the banks getting you charged, there's a constant beating up of the little guy. And yet that's why this story with GameStop is so kind of fascinating, that the little guy's like, oh yeah. Well, now we've got some power, and now they're abusing it. But watch, if you watch that experiment now they're like, they're going to do it to Bed Bath & Beyond next, the stock. They're going to do it to AMC because those are 2 stocks that are dying. And they're even talking about doing it to Blockbuster.
I didn't know Blockbuster was still even alive.
It's the company. Exactly. They was like, you know what? It's so fascinating to see what happens. And even in revolution, when the masses overtake a government or take over, then the cycle starts again. Then they put someone new in power. That person gets addicted to power. And then it's like, oh, I really want to help. But rarely is there some Jesus Christ, Buddha-like, Gandhi-like, figure that takes the power and actually, tries to help, and for a long, long period of time. It does happen, but it's rare. It's usually whoever gets that power gets gets addicted to it and they turn into villains. Which is that's what's the brilliance of Cobra Kai. That is and the power is karate. Is karate, like Hawk, perfect example, that character Hawk, who has a cleft lip and he was beaten up and he was just the complete, like he was as nerdy and as weakling as you can. Then he turns into, sorry, if you haven't seen season 1, I can't help you. There's going to be a slight spoiler here. He turns into one of the baddest, most, kind of bad guys in the show. It's so fascinating to see that kind of like shift. And you were saying something really interesting about Danny and Danny LaRusso and Joey Lawrence, is that they change because of each other's interaction with each other. If you left Daniel LaRusso alone, he would have just stayed being a car dealer dude. And if you let Joey Lawrence, he'd still be wallowing and drinking his beer and, watching his heavy metal music videos from the 80s and he'd be fine. But when you put them together, they react to each other almost as a chemical reaction. And it is a yin and a yang, but the yin and the yang are constantly shifting. And it's so fascinating to watch.
That's a very good point. And,
you're writing notes? Thank you.
Yeah, about that. There's a thing, certainly I didn't think it up, but I think it's really great. And that is, what we need is not revolution or devolution. We need evolution. Because what you just pointed out there, revolution, think about the term revolve. It's like you're a pig on a spit. One side's done. If you make a revolution, you're just cooking the other side. Then the other side's done. That one's done. And it just keeps revolving. Hence the counter-reformation, the counter-revolutions that you find in so many systems. And I think you see that in Cobra Kai. But what they're starting to do is to evolve up.
They are. You're absolutely right, because they can't keep that gimmick. You can't keep up. And then they had to create an even badder guy, which I won't say for anyone listening. They even created a bigger, badder guy, where now the yin and the yang have to figure some stuff out.
Yeah.
It's so brilliant. One of my good friends works on the show. He's one of their editors, and he can't tell me anything because he's signed away his life. But like the moment season 3 popped out, I was just like, dude, he's like, I know, man. I know. It's fascinating, to watch that. Now we hinted about it earlier, but I want to talk about the anti-hero, because the anti-hero has villain-esque tendencies, but yet is driven by a moral code of some sort. And it might not be your moral code or my moral code, but it is a moral code. So I always like using Wolverine, that very famous X-Men character.
Oh, yeah.
Who is the personification of an anti-hero. And he is, in the scope of the movies and stuff, he's definitely shifted towards more being of the good guy than of the anti-hero. There's like glimmers of anti-hero in him. But in the comic books and the original source material, he always danced the line between like, I'm not a hero, but if he sees something bad happening, he's going to take care of it. But I'm not a hero. And the way I do it, you might not like. I love that about anti-heroes. So can you talk a little bit about anti-heroes?
Okay. I think first we need to step into linguistics for a moment. And if you have an anti-anything, it implies there is a system. There is something that it is going against, if you will. Mm-hmm. So the anti-hero will typically be somebody who is rebellious. They don't accept the system that they're in. That's what makes them anti-hero, because the hero of the system is the civilized person who follows all the laws and does everything right and checks all the boxes. And the anti-hero just as rebellious, goes in, says, I don't care about the rules. We're going for this and kick this out of the way. And so in some instances, often what they are upholding is a purity that has gotten lost when a system starts taking over something. You used to see this a lot in the Westerns, where, you're out there on the frontier and you're well, ultimately, of course, doing bad things with killing a whole bunch of people that were there first.
Mm-hmm.
But then you've got the civilizing forces that come in. You get the sheriffs coming in, and you get the lawyers, and you get the newspaper, and then you get the school marms, and then you get the wives and the kids and all this. You get a system, but you still have those cowboys who are out on the edge, who are holding on to something that used to be, in their point of view, noble. Sam Peckinpah's The Wild Bunch is an excellent example of that. And these guys are the end of an era.
Well, samurais are similar.
Yeah.
In samurai movies.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's that leftover, often, in its own interpretation, a noble time, a noble way. And I'm still fighting that way. So the anti-hero, I think, has this sense of nobility within, and also an anger and a disappointment at how the system has corrupted or dulled down everything, taken away things of value. So in a way, an anti-hero can be a savior, if you will, to get us back to something that was better in their eyes.
Right.
Or if we're lucky, they can help us evolve into something that's above even the old way, the current way. Well, let's try a new way.
Well, I think a perfect example of that is Superman and Batman.
Okay.
Batman is, depending on which version of Batman you read or watch, is an anti-hero. And he plays by his own rules. He's a vigilante. He's like, Superman is not a vigilante. He is considered a superhero, even though some people might define him as a vigilante because he doesn't work within the laws, but he's also a god. He's running around. But Batman is a complete kind of almost, mirror image of what Superman values, where Batman is like, we both agree that there's a problem, but we don't agree on how to deal with it. And I'm going to deal with it the way I deal with it. And I'm not going to wait around for other people to give me permission to do so. That's why I think one of the reasons why he's one of the more popular, superheroes of all time is because of that. And also he has weakness. He's a man.
Oh, yeah. And one of the best ones there, I think, is The Dark Knight.
Oh, it's a masterpiece. Absolute masterpiece.
Oh my gosh. And you've got that mythic theme of twins, the two sides of a persona, if you will. And then, the shifting between the balance of power between, it's brilliant.
And chaos and order. And let's talk about a villain, Joker. So, and that's something we haven't spoken about in this episode, which is, a good villain should be the mirror of the hero, in my opinion. Do you agree? Because I think the Joker is literally the opposite. And it's the same thing we were just talking about Cobra Kai. They both are out. One's poor, one's rich, one's defeated, one's not, and then, one has a family, one does. So there's that whole kind of complete mirror image of where it was. And by the way, it was the opposite when they were kids in Karate Kid.
Yeah.
Daniel was the weak and poor, and Johnny was the rich and and had a higher status in society. So it's the more we deep into the psychology of Cobra Kai, we could do a whole episode on Cobra Kai, but going back to Joker and Batman, they are mirror images and they have such different beliefs. Does that really do you agree that makes a villain, a really good villain is having that opposite mirror image?
Absolutely. And you're going back now into when you brought up Lucifer some time ago. Any system that has any kind of duality, I think one of the terms is Manichaean. If you've got the light, you've got to have the dark. Now, Buddhism isn't like that. It doesn't go into dualities as much as many other spiritual systems, philosophical systems do. But absolutely, you've got the mirror image. And so once again, if we get into human psychology, we all fight with our angel on one shoulder, devil on the other shoulder.
Of course.
Yeah. So that polarity creates energy, just like a bar magnet. You can't have two north poles, so there's nothing going to happen. To get work, to get energy, you have to have opposites. And so those opposites then and the shifting between them is what creates the current. Just go to the physics of story.
And that makes, you're so right, because it makes so much sense, because I mean, what drives Dark Knight is those complete polar opposites. Uh-huh. If they were even remote, if Batman was just a bit more chaotic, just a bit, it wouldn't work. Or if the Joker was a bit more civilized, it just wouldn't work. It needed to be those extremes. And I never thought of it that way. It actually creates energy in the story. Mm-hmm. So, perfect. We'll go back to Thanos. Thanos has such a point of view, and the Avengers have a completely different point of view, and they're complete opposites, and in the way they want to deal with things. Is that fair?
Oh, yes, that's how I see it as well. Yeah. Yeah. And it's, that's another basic mythic theme that you find in myths and in stories, is that war in heaven, the fight between how is this world going to be? We agree there's a problem in the world. How are we going to solve it? What is the solution going to look like? And if Thanos wins, it's going to be one way. And if the Avengers win, it's going to be a different way. There's a war about the future of everything. And that's a big mythic theme.
Well, I mean, throughout history, I mean, the Greeks and Shakespeare, I mean, it's constant. It's constant. It's a constant thing throughout mythology and literature. Now I wanted to really quickly talk about the evil person versus the evil group, because there are films in cinema that have bad groups of people, and that they're like, there's not one specific person you can point out. There's groups of them. How does that differ from, and I'm trying to think, I guess the Wild Bunch. Wild Bunch, there's a group of good guys, quote unquote, anti-heroes, if you will.
Yeah.
But I haven't seen the movie in years. Was there a specific bad guy? I remember that there was an army that they had to fight, and what was the deal with that?
Well, there was an army. There were also the civilizing forces of the railroad, telegraph, and I think the telephone was coming in. So it was civilization. The civilization that was uprooting them from their former life. And so they went south of the border, and sure enough, there was a revolution going on in Mexico. And they got caught up in that. So they were a small revolution that moved into a larger revolution and helped the revolutionaries. And it's well worth seeing again. I went to see it at the Dome last time it was here.
Oh, nice.
So marvelous.
That's amazing. Yeah. I haven't seen it in probably a decade, so I don't remember right off the bat, but it's a masterpiece, of course. Anything Peckinpah did almost was a masterpiece. So I wanted to ask you, what is something that all screenwriters should know about when writing a villain or writing their script? And I know that's a very big question, and there's 1,000 things you want to say, but what's that one thing that you're like, if you don't get this, it's never going to work?
Okay. 2 things. These are pretty standard for story. Is, you've absolutely got to have 2 things in a story for it to be a good story. You have to have familiarity, and you have to have surprise. So you need to give us enough that we can identify with somehow, or become familiar with and start rooting for, whether it's the protagonist or the group of them, like in the Wild Bunch. surprise us with how you bring it about. Going back again to The Dark Knight. Okay, we know the Joker's always against Batman. We've seen this forever, so that's familiar to us. Oh my gobbies, what did you do with the Joker? That is so surprising. What? So taking that 30-degree shift in one direction, or just cranking it down a couple of f-stops deeper into the dark side. How are you going to take the familiarity of a storyline, of a genre, and surprise us? But it can't be too crazy, because then nobody will, well, what? What's that?
And I think that that's basically Cobra Kai. You talk, yeah. It's the definition of that, which is familiarity. But then they're like, wait a minute, Daniel's the bad guy? Wait a minute, Johnny's the good guy? Like, wait a minute, they're back. Like, it's a constant, and that's a constant moving and flux kind of surprise. Because every episode, you're just like, who are we rooting for? I don't even know. Let's just keep going on this crazy ride. It's a remarkable thing. Now, I'm going to ask you a few questions I ask all my guests. What are 3 screenplays every screenwriter should read?
Ooh, let's see. Well, I think Apocalypse Now. Mm-hmm. I think Princess Bride.
Goldman, yeah.
Yeah.
So
and
good.
It's just so fabulous. And because we were talking about him, I suggest that people read, and not necessarily that it's one of the best ever written, but there's a part in there that draws you in as the reader. Logan.
Oh, so good. So
yeah,
good.
On about page 2 or 3, the screenwriter breaks the fourth wall for the reader and says, okay, now wait a minute, I'm going to tell you what's going to happen here. Now, this guy is burned out. It's not going to work what he's doing. Nothing he has been trying to do is going to work anymore. He's worn out, and he uses some X words in it. Mm-hmm. But it's like turning to you and say, okay, Alex, let me tell you, before you read any further, you gotta give up some of your ideas about this, because this is what's going to happen. And then he goes back to the regular screenplay, which is good.
But also that works because everyone reading that script is so familiar with that character.
Yeah.
There's such an expectation. You're like, okay, before we keep going here, this is what's going to happen. So you need to break this all out, or if this is not going to work. Okay. Yeah. And we're back in. No, I argue that Logan is in the top 5 best superhero genre films in history. Dark Knight being up there, and Logan being up there. X-Men 2 probably being up there as well. Deadpool, the original. I think it's so hysterically so brilliantly done it's just so brilliant done. But Logan, when I saw Logan, I'm like, oh my God, it transcends the genre. Like Dark Knight was so good that, people were so pissed it didn't get an Oscar nomination that next year they added 5 more spots so they would give a shot to things like that. And it was because it just transcends the genre. And when you transcend a genre, as a writer and as a filmmaker, you've done something pretty special. It doesn't happen very often.
Yeah, absolutely. And we love you for it. Just wonderful when that happens.
Absolutely. Now, what advice would you give a screenwriter trying to break into the business today?
Okay. Well, some of the basics, of course, is write. Mm-hmm. And never give up. Never surrender, to quote Galaxy Quest, which is also a brilliant script.
Fantastic movie. And they're making the sequel. They're making this. I think they just signed on it. They're writing the script right now. So it's the cast is back. But yes, I just saw it recently, by the way. And again, I'm sorry, guys listening. We have to go on a Galaxy Quest side note here.
Yes, we do.
How that movie is aged so well.
Yes.
It should have been a throwaway movie. It should have been just like, oh, that's kind of nice. But the emotions in that movie hold so brilliantly. It's kind of like Elf. Like you watch Elf and you're just like, this is just a silly comedy, but then it's like, no, it's so much more than a silly comedy. Like it resonates on a deeper level with the audience. So go ahead, continue. I'm sorry.
And I would say if you have not seen it, do see it.
Mm-hmm.
I've probably seen it 100 times. We used to watch it once a week, and almost every day one of us is quoting. It's no time for pleasantries, Kyle. Never somebody. Oh, I knew it.
It's so good. So good. So good. So, okay. So right.
Okay. Right. Also, I would say, read actual books.
Stop
Read
it.
some of the classics.
Stop it.
I know. It may seem a heretical idea,
mm-hmm.
and not just the Western Civ books, but, read novels, read the first Chinese novel written by a woman, 1,500 years ago. Okay. And, get yourself at least one book of mythology.
Oh yeah.
Because that's where they keep all the good stories, is in the myths.
Yeah.
And it'll help you so much in your storytelling. And all of us are seeing media all the time. That's great. But as far as writing, read books, read screenplays, read mythology, and I would say persist. And I have a personal story to tell about that.
Mm-hmm.
In 1977, we wrote a screenplay, and we polished it and, got it out there for a while. And there was some interest at one point from MGM, but then they had a regime change. We all know what happens after that. Usually nothing. So it kind of sat on a shelf for a while. And then a couple of years ago, we brought it back out. And, because of some things that had happened in the world, and started entering it in contests. And it was a winner at the Bahamas International Film Festival.
Okay.
And we got to go spend a week in the Bahamas.
Yes.
At a writer's retreat.
Jeez.
On a script that we had written in 1977, practically fresh out of film school.
Worth the price of admission just to get a trip over to the Bahamas, right? I mean, why not?
Absolutely. And it's so wonderful now. Writers are so fortunate that you can get your stories out to so many different production companies. When we first started, there were the major studios, and that was it. And fortunately, we were able to get some things around. But enter some of these script contests. Write up your pitch materials and submit through the pitch portals. There are a lot of places out there where you can pay X amount of dollars and list your script or your log line or send out query letters. And we've just recently, in the last couple of weeks, had some requests from some good companies for some of our stuff just going through the pitch portals. So it's really a great time to be a writer. People are looking for content. They want what you've got. And just remember, they're looking for what you're doing. So do it well and get it out there. And good luck.
Now, what is the lesson that took you the longest to learn, whether in the film business or in life?
Oh, well, that's a really good question because you make it so broad. Listen to your own intuition.
Mm-hmm.
Whether it's the one that says, don't go on that rafting trip instead of the rap party. Should have gone to the rap party. Almost drowned on the rafting trip. And it says sometimes, you can just kind of get a sense that this is not going to be a good shoot. We were asked once, I won't mention the country, but we were asked by a country to come over and do some documentary work for them. And we thought about it for about 10 minutes and then said, nah, thank you very much, but no. Learn to recognize danger. Listen to other people's stories. Watch the news a bit. Don't get, totally grossed out on it. But observe and pay attention to your own inner monitor, your own inner voice.
And where can people find you and the work that you do?
Oh, thank you. They can go to PamelaJayeSmith.com or mythworks.net. They'll take you to the same place. And there are all of our newsletters for years gone by, interviews, articles, stuff we've done, stuff we're doing, my consultation services, et cetera, et cetera.
It has been an absolute pleasure talking to you, Pamela. Thank you so much for taking us down the path of the dark side, and showing us, teaching us about villains. And I just love the conversation. I had a ball talking about characters and villains and Cobra Kai.
You have some wonderful questions. Thank you. Thank you. It was thought provoking for me and brought up some new thoughts as well. So great. Thank you so much.
I want to thank Pamela for coming on the show and dropping her dark side bombs on the tribe today. Thank you so much, Pamela. If you want to get links to anything we spoke about in this episode, including how to get access to her book, Power of the Dark Side, head over to the show notes at bulletproofscreenwriting.tv/108. And if you haven't already, please head over to screenwritingpodcast.com and leave a good review for the show. It really, really helps us out a lot. Thank you so much for listening, guys. As always, keep on writing, no matter what. Stay safe out there, and I'll talk to you soon.
Thanks for listening to the Bulletproof Screenwriting Podcast at bulletproofscreenwriting.tv.